This is Family Twist, a podcast about astonishing adoption stories and finding family via DNA magic. I'm Kendall.
And I'm Corey, and we've been inseparable partners in life since 03, 04, 05, also known as March 4th, 2005.
In January 2018, our found family journey took us 3,000 miles from the San Francisco Bay Area to New England, where we now live near my biological father, two half siblings, and their families. We love being near them all, and the adventure continues.
Thanks for joining us again. Our guest today is Libby Copeland, an award-winning journalist who wrote the book The Lost Family: How DNA Testing is Upending Who We Are. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Now, the book's been out for a couple of years, but I think it's safe to say that it's becoming more relevant every day. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, the numbers of people who sign up for consumer DNA testing just grow all the time, right? And every time there's a big holiday or somebody decides that it's it's Amazon Prime Day or it's Christmas or it's, St. Patrick's Day, let's buy a DNA test kit for dad slash mom slash sister, right? Yeah, the databases just grow all the time. And we're well over 40 million at this point.
Just astounding. I mean, I saw some recent statistics, and Kendall and I were going over them together, and it's just like, wow. Like, we knew that there were a decent community or a large enough population out there because we've been able to get guests for the show every week, but didn't realize that many people were digging in and getting these discoveries. And
Right.
as
Everyone knows someone who's made a discovery through a DNA test. And, everyone who's listening, their DNA is already in the databases in some form because cousins have spit into, test kits already. So, yeah, it's one of these technologies that is increasingly impacting everyone you meet.
right. And I mean, you touch on so many of the important aspects of home DNA testing in the book. And you just mentioned, like, sort of the privacy aspect of people who haven't taken the test yet. As you said, their DNA's out there, potentially out there for people to utilize.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of complicated thing about writing about the consumer DNA industry is we don't know yet what we don't know, right? And we don't know what's coming. And so a lot of times as I was reporting The Lost Family, I would sort of say, well, like what are the vulnerabilities here for my information? Because my information is in 3 databases, right? So, what are the vulnerabilities here? What are the potential issues with regard to, I don't know, insurance or a hack or, law enforcement? Um, and I would be told, well, this is possible. It hasn't happened yet, but right. And then as time would go, sometimes those things that were possible but hadn't happened would happen. So, for instance, this consumer DNA started being used to solve crimes, which people have all kinds of feelings about. Some people are very upset about it. Other people think that it's really fantastic, and there's a whole panoply of folks in between. So it's a little hard to predict sometimes just exactly how this technology is going to wind up being used in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. So many facets to home DNA tests. And as a journalist, I know what a huge undertaking a book is. So I've got to know, what was the idea and what made you think, like, okay, I want to take the time and do all this research and turn this into a book.
Yeah, that's a good question because I've been a journalist for um, a long time. And I never, ever had a topic before that I wanted to write a book about. There were plenty of things I wrote about that were interesting, but I couldn't see living with them for that many years.
Right.
um, what I like about DNA testing as a topic, I mean, there's so many pieces of it that are interesting to me. Part of it is this kind of idea um, of technology kind of intersecting with our lives in a way that like is really, really modern, feels postmodern, but then also is taking us into the past, right? So there's this like crazy kind of collision of past and future and present happening, abetted by technology, which kind of blows my mind. Um, but what I really also liked were, the kind of the human stories, the ways in which, the family, this institution that goes back to as long as we humans have been around, is being altered irrevocably and reshaped by the technology, and also, these questions around identity that are very relevant to our current day existence as Americans, and all these assumptions we have about, where we come from, and melting pot America, and assimilation, and like, how we conceive of things like race and ethnicity, which are very artificial in many ways and sort of formed by our culture and our values around us. How those things kind of get shifted by DNA testing, and how our assumptions influence our perceptions when we take a test. All that stuff was really interesting. So anyway, I started writing about it for the Washington Post, which is my old newspaper. And I wrote a story about this incredible woman who, named Alice, who took a DNA test back over 10 years ago when the technology was still new. And she got this completely unexpected result, right? She thinks she's going to be completely Irish American. It turns out she's half Ashkenazi Jewish. And she's like, how can this be? Like, this doesn't comport with anything I know about my family. Here she is, one of 7 kids, raised Irish Catholic to Irish American parents. Like, she's just figuring, okay, well, this test that I took through this company called Ancestry, maybe they don't really know what they're doing. Let me take a test with this other company called 23andMe, which she's never heard of before then, right? And so she takes this 23andMe test, and the results come back the same. She's half Ashkenazi Jewish. And she's like, well, but this is, what do I not know? Is my father not my father? And she goes through this incredible journey that lasts 2.5 years. And she basically investigates every single possible theory she can think of. Oh, her mom had an affair, relationship outside the marriage. Maybe she's adopted, there's always the possibility of a donor conception, not in her family, but for many other folks, right? Maybe it's this, maybe it's that, and none of them hold true. And so her theories to explain have to get more and more far-fetched. And ultimately, she winds up proving the most far-fetched theory of all. And the kind of origins of her mystery go back like 100 years. It's this really wacky story with a lot of history in it. So I wrote this story. It ran in the Post in the summer of 2017, and I got the like hundreds of reaction emails from readers within the first few weeks of people who said, like, that story was really good, but I also have a really good DNA testing story and I want to tell it to you. And they were sharing their stories with me. And it was the reading these stories and seeing the profundity of people's experiences that made me think, oh, this has got to be a book.
Awesome. Now, I know how much journalism has changed over the years, and which is one of the reasons why I sort of got out of it, at a certain point, because it was just, skeleton crews at everywhere you go. And, it was like editing, sort of went out the window, and I could go on and on. But how rare was it back then to get that kind of response from an article, like to hear from folks?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird, right? Because sometimes you get a big, tremendous response just because you've done like a listicle. Right. So it's not necessarily relationship to how hard you work on something or how meaningful it is. This was a rare instance where it was something I cared about a lot and I got a big reaction. But in other instances, I remember doing kind of throwaway political stories and getting huge reaction and being like,
Hmm.
well, that's not really that meaningful. This was just a horse race story, right?
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it was. I think the biggest thing for me was that I got. I know what you're talking about with freelance. I'm definitely one of those disillusioned people. But in this instance, I did get a lot of support from the Post for writing a piece that was quite long.
Yeah.
And so they were able to run the piece at like 6,000 words, which for a newspaper is a lot.
Yes.
And they put it on the front. So, it was like an A1 story that went on and on and on. And I think people, like, when they see such a long story starting on the front, they're like, oh, this is important. Let me read it.
Right. Right. But I think a lot of people get into writing books because there's some sort of personal connection to it. Does that hold true for you, or was it just compelling, this whole idea of,
Yeah. I mean, personal connection, yes. Although it's not like I took a DNA test and I was like, oh my God, like, this is reconfiguring my sense of myself. Like, it was much more subtle. I did take DNA tests over time as I was writing the articles and then the book. Um, it wasn't as if I had some big surprise on the other side.
hmm
But I think that the questions that we engage with when we think about things like genetic ancestry and inheritance and genes and what we pass down and all that stuff, I think that is really relevant to like every human being I've ever met.
Yeah.
Right, because it's stuff about, like, who am I? How am I formed? What made me who I am? What is the me, the essential me? Like, that's stuff that if you're, like, just kind of walking around thinking about, like, life and the meaning of life and why we're here, that, like, you ruminate on, and that's stuff that DNA testing brings to the fore, inevitably.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm not sure how much you know about, Kendall's story, and I can give you like the 30-second version, but essentially, um, adopted at birth, and both of his adoptive parents died when he was quite young, and closed adoption in Arkansas. So he tried for many years and
Mm.
nothing. So um, eventually, I did get him an ancestry kit, and he took it and immediately matched with his half brother here on the East Coast, and then found out he's got a half sister, and his father still lives here. And then after several conversations with his brother, like they've kind of solved the mystery for his mother's side. Then all of a sudden he finds out his mother's alive, and he's got three siblings on that side. And it's all like, we come and visit out here and decide to move here, and it's all fairy tale until it's not, you
Oh,
know
wow.
until it's then he's still had, it's been more than 5 years and still hasn't had any contact with his mother.
Oh,
And
wait,
so
where did you guys move from and to?
we moved from lovely San Francisco Bay Area, California, to New Hampshire.
And you moved to New Hampshire because you were hoping to be closer to his birth parents in part and extended
Well,
family?
we decided to move here because we just he I could sense this immediate connection between him and his brother, and his dad and his sister, and he'd never had that. And I was like, and I knew that that was a piece that was missing,
Yeah,
from his heart. So we had moved away from where we grew up, and we're living in California for 9 years, and had kind of created our own
right,
family there. But I was like, it would be horrible for me to be that selfish and not give him this opportunity, to get to know his family. Because if we had stayed in California, like how often realistically would we have seen
right.
them?
Yeah. What a
So
gift you gave him.
yeah, I mean, and so I would say, it's been mostly great, coming out here. I mean, I didn't love. I'm sure you're used to the snow, but I was out there dealing with the snow again today.
No, it's bullshit. Let's
Yeah,
just agree it shouldn't exist.
right, exactly. So but this thing with his birth mother, I mean, and I'm sure you've talked to many people who have done this same thing, where they figure out who it is, and he can't wait to reach out. So then he on Facebook reaches out to his birth mother, his mother's sister, his aunt, and then finds two siblings, and
Right.
reaches out to them, basically just like thrusts himself into their world. And I said, I don't know if it's such a good idea, because what if your siblings don't know that you exist? And guess what? That was the case.
Of
Had no
course.
idea. And so turns out,
Wow.
he sends this Facebook message to his youngest sister. She's out shopping with her mother, reads this, is like, this is crazy, shows it to her. Mom turns white as a sheet, has to sit down. She's got the vapors and everything. And his sister knows it's true. And then what seems like is going to be like an opportunity for a full reunion just never develops. And we still haven't gotten a straight answer as to um, why that is. I mean, I jokingly I could say straight answer. We think it might have something to do with the fact that it's we're a gay couple. He's gay, but we've never he's never had that opportunity to have that conversation. And
So,
so
can I just ask you, I'm sorry that I don't know
sure,
the answer to this, but, like, so were his birth parents, were they together? Like, were they a couple? Were they married when they
they
conceived?
weren't married. They were young teenagers. They were military kids on a base. Now, according to his dad, they were, yes, they were young, but they were in love, and it was, this happened. They both wanted to keep the baby, and it being a military base, the captain or whoever was in charge decided that one family's got to go. They both can't stay, so her family went away, and she quietly had the baby and gave it up for adoption, and that was that. Now, neither one
Wow.
of them learned their lesson either. They both ended up having another child each within the next like less than a year and a half.
And his mother, did she how many children does she have altogether?
Three. And
3,
his dad
okay.
and his dad has three.
Wow.
Oh, I'm sorry. His dad has
I'm
four.
just
Four. Sorry. There's another. He's got another half brother who
yeah.
was also given up for adoption.
Wow. It is his mother his birth mother, is she very conservative? Religious or conservative or
We think I don't know how. Yeah, they are. I think they are. Yes, yes, and yes. Religious and yeah, and conservative. You know,
like Catholic or like
I think that Southern Baptist. I think or Baptist. You know, one of the some kind of Baptist or something. Which actually Kendall was raised Southern Baptist. And you know,
Mm.
yeah,
It's so interesting to me. Like I mean, I've heard so many stories, obviously, that each one is different, right? Um, but in some situations where where birth moms are reluctant to like meet their biological children, it has to do with like this the shame around how this child was conceived or placed for adoption,
yeah.
but it sounds like it was a consensual relationship and
Everything we've heard, yes,
yeah.
you know, and it's yeah, it's
So it's
interesting.
like it's surprising, although for sure, like I think there's something to this idea that if she didn't tell her children and she felt like she had a certain identity to them, that to like make that discovery, it's like it alters how people see you, and so the easier thing is to kind of compartmentalize it and just not deny it, but sort of.
Yeah, it's I mean, I think it's just, you know, it was buried. Now it's become unburied a little bit, but I'm trying to rebury it. And I
God,
mean
what a
the
situation! What a situation! Yeah, that's
yeah,
so
it's
hard.
and again, you never know what's going to happen,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you've spoken to people who have had way, worse experiences and way bigger surprises, but yeah, I think like a big bummer is that he is really really close with his sister, oldest sister on his mom's side, and just the two of them together is like, wow, how have these two not known each other their entire lives because they just instant connection,
So
and
she has a relationship with him even though her mother doesn't?
yes,
And does the mother know it?
yes, and it's become a source of friction within the
Of
family.
course. And what's the mother say? Like, "Don't do that. You shouldn't have a relationship," or "That's fine for you, but not for me," or
Well, it's funny because I think the story has changed. I think at the very beginning was like, I'm not ready yet, but I totally understand if you kids want to have a
right.
relationship with him, And I think then, I don't know, maybe her mind changed or something, but
It
yeah,
usually goes I mean, a lot of times it goes in the other way.
yeah,
Like, and so that's surprising and interesting. I feel so bad. It sounds like so much unfinished business
yeah,
for you guys. It sounds like this big unanswered question. And I have to say, like when I was I'm not obviously I haven't had this experience personally, and everyone's experience is different, but like one of the biggest things that people would talk about being a problem for them was this inability to get their questions answered.
right,
That is like this open wound.
yes,
So frustrating,
yes,
to not be able to say like, okay, what is the real truth here? Like, what is it? It feels personal. How could it not feel personal, even though obviously it's not personal? It feels very
right,
personal. And so you
sure.
need to say like, what is the reason behind you? Yeah, that's crazy making. That's so hard.
It is crazy making. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely it's something that I'm sure he thinks about it every single day. I don't necessarily think about
Yeah.
it every single day, but it does come up a lot, and it comes
Yeah.
into my mind. It's like if I see like a post on a Facebook that his sister posted or whatever, and his mom's in there, it's just like, oh, that's it's just
Yeah.
it's a huge
Salt
bummer.
salt in the wound.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I guess I'm curious because you've done so much probably more research than we have, just to put the book out. Like, is that how common is that? Is it and like what kind of takeaways do you have for folks who are
Yeah.
wind up in this situation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I always wish that I had data, but I can't give you data, right? I can't,
Yeah.
and no one has data. And part of the issue is that these situations are so self selecting in
Hmm.
terms of who wants to tell their story. right? What families want the 360 of their relationships told. Um, Typically, the older generation that's willing to talk to me is willing to talk to me or another reporter because they have chosen to embrace their child, their newfound, old found genetic
Right.
child, right?
Right.
Um, a lot of the stories that I wound up telling, I was forced to tell only from the point of view of the adult child because their parent had not wanted to have a relationship with them and didn't want to participate and didn't want to be interviewed, right?
Yeah.
But it's really, really, really common.
Yeah.
It's so common, and I think I these situations are so hard because there's this way in which I mean secrets in a family are their own kind of force, right?
Yeah.
And when you make the decision to keep a secret from your spouse or your children or whatever about, say, having gotten pregnant and placing a child, um, that becomes it becomes, I think, harder to break that, to undo that secret or to undo that omission or lie, right, over time.
Right.
You would think like maybe, well, the culture is changing, it's liberalizing around me, so it's not such a big deal. But in fact, there's a kind of like inertia to the secret itself, I think. And then people's trust in you and their image of you is predicated on this thing that you never told them about yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So then it becomes harder and harder with each passing year to ever reveal that truth.
Right.
And then it's like there's weird situation where, somehow the person, when your genetic child, for instance, kind of makes an appearance and knocks on your email inbox and says, "Hey, I'm here. I exist. I've discovered I'm related to you." There's a way in which it can be felt by that genetic parent as like it's like you're accosting me. This is my privacy, and you're invading my space, right? Like your attempts to get to know your family, it's my family, right? So there's a
Right.
kind of a boundary, or a sense of mine versus yours. But of course, when it comes to biological relatedness, it's shared that these are his siblings. Whether or not, you know, anyone does or doesn't feel that way, that is the reality of it, right?
Right.
So um, there's this way in which your interests are up against my privacy or my secrets or my past or my myself, right? My image of myself, or how other people see me. And people feel invaded. It's very interesting. I did see a lot of situations where families felt invaded by this person who was coming their way. And
Yeah.
what was so painful for that person was that, here they were, hey, they had just discovered their parents, their genetic parents, and they were so eager to be embraced. And it feels incredibly painful to be rejected by people. Even if you can say to yourself, well, they don't know me, so they're not truly rejecting me. It feels like a rejection, right?
Yeah.
So it is really, really common. And
Yeah.
I'm so sorry it's common, I couldn't exactly parse what made, why people made decisions in certain directions. It has to do with all sorts of factors, religious belief, and are you now in a blended family versus a traditional family, all sorts of things seem to go into whether a genetic parent can sort of remake their idea of themselves to allow a relationship with this adult child or not.
Right. Yeah. Um, well, your book is definitely a cautionary tale. I mean, I think I loved the headline. I think it was the New York Times that said, "Before you spit in a tube, read this book." Great, great headline. I mean, what advice do you have for people who are, oh, somebody just gifted me an ancestry kit. What do I do?
Yeah, I mean, I think, listen, I'm someone who's like personally benefited from DNA testing in the sense that like it's accentuated our ability to understand our roots, make connections with, you know, distant relatives, discover people that we are related to that we would not have known we were related to,
Yeah.
but for DNA. Um, and so I'm glad to have done it, right? Um, But the thing is, you don't know before you take a test whether you're going to be one of those people who it just helps your genealogy,
Yeah. Right.
or you've discovered nothing other than what you were already assuming to be true, or something radically different, right?
Yeah.
And the vast majority of people that I talked to told me, like, even when their discoveries were really painful, that they were glad to know because we put such value on the truth.
Hmm.
But it's still a very emotional process to move through.
Yeah.
So what I tend to say to people is just to kind of know that you won't know what you're going to find until you've taken the test. And you kind of have to be okay with anything. And
Right.
if you're not in a place where you can kind of accept that level of potential destabilization, maybe you wait a little while.
Yeah.
Although increasingly it's not up to us, right? Increasingly it's your sister who tests or your first cousin who tests and makes the discovery that changes how you think about yourself. And so to some degree, we're not even in control of this anymore.
Yeah, that's an interesting thought, is that people are getting thrust into this, who may have already made the decision that I don't want to know,
Right.
but
Exactly.
somebody's made that decision for them, and then all of a sudden
Exactly.
it's like, here it's in your lap. What do we do with this now?
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you think you're mentally prepared if something were to pop up in yours unexpectedly?
Um, I mean, I'm at the point where I think every family has secrets, and
Yeah.
every person in their, kind of network is going to have a situation where someone doesn't know something important about their own genetic identity or about a sibling that
Yeah.
they didn't realize existed, for instance, right?
Right. Right.
Like, I think that is true in every network, every family network. It's a question of closeness, right? If you discover that in a second cousin, that's different than discovering it about yourself,
Yeah.
right? It's much more meaningful if it happens to a sibling. That's got all sorts of implications for how you view your parents and how much you trust your father's, faithfulness to your mother, et cetera, et cetera, versus like far enough away that you haven't even seen, your aunt since that bat mitzvah way back in whenever. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, I do kind of like, given that all my most of my family is already in the databases, so I know that, like, I know I'm genetically related to my mom and my dad, right? So I know it wouldn't be a surprise of that kind. So any other surprise would be a little bit further out.
Hmm.
And I'm fully prepared for that to happen because I've seen it happen in so many families that it's literally a matter of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the fact that these two companies now are enormous?
40 million, most of them are Americans. It's a really interesting situation. I mean, if you look at, for instance, the potential of it from the point of view of medical breakthroughs, you take that amount of information and there is a kind of vast possibility for the development of, say, like a pharmaceutical breakthrough for a cancer drug, right? And that's what
Right.
23andMe has been pursuing. um, there's also like a great vulnerability there, right, for our information. And how meaningful that information is depends on how you might want to use it, right?
Yeah.
And who what the kind of goal is of the individual if they were to access it. Um, so it's it's interesting because the way that the rules around this is governed has to do with contracts that are put out by the company. So like basically they're telling me these are the rules under which you're accepting our service. What do you think? Take it or leave it, right? So we're protected by a business contract. And that's interesting because I think in some countries, in some places, there might be more of a sense of like the government wanting to step in and regulate it. But of course, that's not our environment. So it, kind of remains to be seen how this information could be used if, for instance, a company decided to change how it was treating the DNA information, then the genetic information that they had, and then the customers actually don't have that much power to say no to that. Aside from maybe deleting their data.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. So, the initial story you wrote for the Post about 6 years ago, your book's been out for a couple of years now, but it's still in the conversation that we're having. So, what kind of feedback are you continuing to get from people? Are you still getting people reaching out wanting to tell their stories, and what does that do? What is that making you think
yeah,
about for another project?
yeah, for sure. I mean, in the beginning, when I was first starting to write the book, I would tell people about it, and, like, people would sometimes not know exactly what DNA testing was, or they'd be like, "Well, how does that work?" Increasingly, that's, like, a thing of the past, right? Not only do I do, I'll do book talks where I tell people about it, and, not only, of course, that they know how it works, whether or not they've done it, but everyone knows somebody who had some huge DNA surprise, right? They discovered their dad's not genetically related to them. They found out they have a sibling they didn't know about. They discovered their part such and such in terms of their genetic ancestry, and it was a big family secret, you know?
Right.
Um, so everyone's, and yes, I still get emails from people telling me their stories. I still follow up with people that I interviewed. Some made it into the book, some didn't. And they update me on their situation. Like, oh, my donor father has declined contact, or oh, I've finally made contact with my donor father. Like, it's a journey. It goes on
Yeah.
forever,
Yeah.
Um, as far as like a follow-up book on the same topic, probably not. I don't think that I would do that right now. I think you'd kind of want to watch the industry and let it develop for a while before you could
Hmm.
do a book that would be really fresh. Otherwise, it would be too similar to the first one.
Gotcha.
Um, but yeah, so not right now. But it's definitely an area that I continue to be very interested in.
Well, sure, as you said, it's a journey, and if you're getting updates, from people whose stories have changed, since you've told
Yeah,
them,
definitely.
it's not sort of a cut and dry, like here's the beginning, here's the end, and now let me move on to the next subject,
I
because as
mean,
you said, like
yeah,
it's expanding every day.
right. And look at your all's experience with like your, initial experience. And then as time goes by, and then you make a decision to move, and then this relationship develops, but this relationship stays frozen. It's so difficult to predict how these things are going to play out in a family.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. It certainly can be heartwarming and heartbreaking,
Yes,
stuff.
exactly.
Even when we hear, people going through similar situations, it's like, how does your heart not go out to them?
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know,
Exactly. Yeah.
and I'm sure that that's you've heard from many of folk who they get this discovery and then they get all excited and they find out, oh, their parents died 2 years before and they didn't get the
And they
opportunity.
can't ask them. They
Yeah,
can't ask them like, was I wanted?
right.
Why did you place me for adoption? Did you look for me? I mean, there was a woman who she had that she was had been placed for adoption as a baby, and she discovered her birth mother's identity shortly after her birth mother died, and that was the one question that she wanted to ask that she could never get answered, and it tortured her. Was,
Yeah,
did you look for me? Did you think about me?
right.
She wanted to know that she was looked for.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really
I'm
hard.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to wonder, like, what over the last 5 to 10 years, what percentage of people have started therapy because of a
Oh,
discovery? You
definitely.
know?
Well, this was something that I noticed as I was writing my book, and I included it in some of the reporting towards like one of the last chapters was this rise in mental health professionals specifically to treat people who've experienced DNA surprises.
Yeah,
Most commonly, the experience of a misattributed parentage experience or non parentage event, NPE or MPE,
right.
and there's so many people. And, all of the therapists that I talked to who were treating people in this area were doing it because they had themselves taken a DNA test, had made the discovery that their father wasn't genetically related to them, and then went looking for a therapist and realized they couldn't find one. In other words, there was nobody who specialized in this. And
Yeah,
the people that they did go to sometimes didn't get it. They didn't get the seriousness of it. They didn't understand how big a deal it was. And so then
right.
once they worked through it, then they started to treat other people.
That's wild.
Yeah, there's a whole network actually of therapists right now who treat MPEs.
Wow. And
Yeah.
would you say that the majority of them have been through a situation themselves, or they
I
just
mean,
or the demand is there, they've had to sort of up their
of the
game?
four that I interviewed, like directly at length,
Yeah.
it had happened to every single one of them, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Um, there are many more. There's probably 20 or 30, whether it's happened to every one of them. I would be surprised if they didn't all have some personal reason for getting into this work,
Yeah.
you know?
Wow. Interesting. I mean, it's so impactful, I think, when, for whoever it experiences it. I'm sure it's like whatever industry you're in, you probably think like, well, what can I do within my area of expertise to help people who are going through this.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and that's kind of why we, started this podcast, because initially I talked about turning it into a book, and then for one reason or another that sort of got put on the back burner. But it's like, what if it was not just our story, or what if we'd love to hear from other people, because what can we learn from
Yeah.
them, and what
Yeah.
can others that are on the fence about taking the test, or have taken the test and have had a horrible experience or something like it, can we let them know that, hey, there are some happy endings out there, or there are
Right.
some good aspects of this.
And how can we normalize these experiences for people so people know it's not just my crazy family, it's everyone's crazy family,
Exactly, right, because
right?
then once it becomes more normalized, then it's like, I think
Right.
people are more open to, like, oh, before somebody thrusts this upon them, then, like, sit your adult children down and say, like, hey, when I was
Exactly.
16,
Yes.
this
Exactly.
happened, and so
And
you
if
know
it's not just you, it takes the sting out of it. It takes the shame out
right,
of it, right? Because shame is
right,
like the biggest killer of conversations and healing, right?
yeah,
So to the extent that you can be like, well, like every family's been through this, lots of like I'm not the only one making this
right,
discovery, or I'm not
yeah,
the only parent who, placed a child and didn't see that child for a long time and now is reconnecting with that child. I think it really helps.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So if that's not going to be necessarily your next book, are you thinking about a next book? Just as a
Um,
journalist, I have to ask.
I'm not right now,
Okay.
actually. I mean, I'm sort of, there's a topic that I've been interested in reading on and off, which is sort of the history of eugenics.
Mm,
And so I'm very interested in how we came to certain assumptions about like our genes and, you know, what defines us and what defines race. Because I think we bring all those assumptions to our
mm,
understanding of DNA testing, and also our understanding of difference and our understanding of belonging and our understanding of America and all this other stuff, right?
right.
It's a really problematic frame that was once mainstream science that we still carry with us to a great extent within the culture. So I've always been interested in that. I mean, going back for a long, long time, even before I wrote the book, I was interested in the history of eugenics and how mainstream it was. So that's something that I am interested in, and if I could ever figure out a really awesome way of writing about it, that might be my next project, but
Awesome.
it hasn't happened
Awesome.
yet.
What I can make a prediction that books like yours, I think, are going to help inspire, um, not necessarily more nonfiction, but I think fiction,
Mhm.
because as this becomes more and more normalized, and we're going to see this showing up in TV shows and movies and things like that.
Definitely.
Like, I think last year there was a movie that came out. Ended up being a vampire movie, but it was somebody got contacted, like invited to a lavish wedding for a family member that didn't know existed, and it was this whole DNA sort of twist on it. So I thought it was clever in that at least they're
DNA
utilizing
and
something.
vampires
Right, yes, let's
together.
right, why not, right?
Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, I definitely see this topic showing up more in the entertainment side of things, just as more,
Yeah.
as you said, more and more people, I mean, if 40 million people have done this,
Yes.
how many millions would be interested in seeing something like, or seeing a version of their story told?
Yes, exactly, and there are a lot of shows. There are reality shows, there are scripted shows, there are memoirs, there are fictional books. And I hear about a lot of them because I'll either get pitched on them, or I'll see a press release or something about them, right? Or the
Right.
or the writers will write to me and be like, can you blurb this? It's there's a lot and more all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. This has been great. We appreciate the that you spent the time to write this book, because it's going to be, it's continuing, I think, to help a lot of people through this situation. If people have the opportunity, if they've been, if they have this test sitting there and they're waiting to take it and wondering if they should, then,
Yeah.
then they can read your book on a Kindle and make their decision from that.
Well, and I think like I'm glad that you guys are doing what you're doing, because it the more stories that get told, the fewer people who will find themselves alone in this situation.
Right.
They're definitely not alone, right?
Yeah.
It's such a common experience, and the one thing it's taught me talking to all these people and writing about this topic is there's no standard shape of a family. There never was.
Right. Right.
There may have been stigmas against certain ways of being a family, but those families happened anyway. And now
Exactly.
is the moment when we're just kind of like through a combination of cultural forces and DNA technology, right, we're lifting kind of the veil on the past and saying, okay, this is the way that it really was. And I think if we can find a way to grapple with that in a healthy way, where we bring a lot of compassion to it, I think we can emerge better on the other side.
Absolutely. I think, everyone can be a little bit more open to the
Yeah.
concept of what a family is,
Yes. Yeah.
and not sort of be stuck in this, this is what it was for me growing up, and
Right.
etc. It's like there isn't any such thing as like a quote unquote normal family or whatever you want to look at.
Yeah.
That 1950s black and white TV show kind of thing
Exactly.
is not,
Yeah.
that's not reality, you
Right.
know. And as you said, it wasn't completely back then,
It
but
wasn't.
now, now that
Yeah.
all these things are coming to light, it's like, family, you know, can mean a lot
Yeah.
of different things, for
Yeah.
sure. For
So
sure.
yeah, I'm glad you guys are talking about that and kind of using your joint experience to like help other people, because that's the best way to like take something complicated and make spin it into gold, is to
Right.
like make your experience mean something to help other people. That's so like beautiful.
Thank you. And that's definitely the goal. And it's
Yeah.
been, very eye opening and educational for us.
Yeah.
Gives me the opportunity to continue to flex my journalist muscles because I don't do it full time anymore.
What do
So,
you do? What do you do as your day job?
marketing. So I'm
Okay.
a content strategist. So I
Cool.
mean, I still get the opportunity to write, but it's
Mhm.
just not, not for the mass media. Well, it's always great to chat with a kindred spirit.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me on. I really appreciate
Absolutely,
it.
absolutely. Thanks for being on, and hopefully you don't mind if I, reach out to you in the future, and either
Absolutely.
for advice or if like if I've got a question just related to a guest, that would be great. It's
Yeah, no, absolutely.
always good to have a subject matter expert available.
Yeah, I'm thrilled to be called that.
Good,
Right now,
good.
I'm an
Hey,
expert in coziness with my
you d-
sweaters and my
right.
but yes, I'll be that kind of expert too.
Well, you put the work in. I mean, it's like I mean, I
Yeah.
don't. A lot of people don't understand what it
Oh my
takes
god.
to write a book, and I mean, it's years of dedication,
Yeah,
and
for sure. And
it's
this science was very hard. That was part was very
right,
complicated. So yeah,
right.
no, that was I'm happy not to do that again for a while.
But yes, I bow to you because it's journalism is not a tough or is not an easy gig,
Yeah.
especially these days. So thank you for continuing the art.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so thank you so much. Well, thank you for hosting me, and I'm sure we'll be in touch.
Family Twist features original music from Cosmic Afterthoughts and is presented by Savoir Faire Marketing Communications.